Hi there, this is Ibrahim again with another video on the topic of learning Flutter. So in the last few videos we've actually seen how to, so we started designing an app that we want to code, and so it's called Katra, the blood donation app. We've designed these screens in Figma, and then now we're converting these screens from design to, from sketches to an actual application, to an actual code that actually runs on an actual mobile device. So we're starting off with these onboarding screens. That's what we will do in this video. In the previous video, we've also looked at how to run any Flutter app in your system. So three main components are needed. The very first one is, of course, the code base of Flutter that you download from flutter.dev. And then you also need an IDE. I recommended VS Code, Visual Studio Code. And the other very important component you need is Android Studio installed. Yeah, that's that. If you're using Mac, you probably need Xcode to run in an iOS simulators. But I think Android Studio does a pretty good job, and this is a cross-platform, so whatever runs in your Android would definitely on Android Studio would definitely run on Xcode. But you could have whichever you like. Anyways, so I'll try to make things as simple as possible and explain the very important details that you need to know. So let's dive right in. Yeah. So the very first thing we need to do, if you're working with Flutter, the very first thing we need to do is how to explain this. Okay, all right. I think the best way to understand this is to look at the Android Studio itself, the Android emulator itself. As you can see here, it's like in any application you have like some sort of header, and then you have like a body here, and then you have some sort of footer. Yeah. So with any application, you have some sort of content in the middle of the screen. So this is the full screen. This is the full screen, and in order for us to actually start, displaying text, displaying different kind of widgets. So, okay, I think this is the best way to explain this. With Flutter, everything is dependent on something called widgets. So a text is a widget, a date picker is a widget, a button is a widget, an icon is a widget. Like everything is about widgets. So a screen is a compound of widgets. You have multiple widgets lined up somehow, form a screen that performs a certain function. In this example of ours, the onboarding screen, we have an actual component here. We have text, and we have these circles here that indicate the progress of the onboarding screen, and we have a button that has a text. And then we also have this image here that is also another component. So everything is about components. Now, one thing you should do, so the very first thing to do is to import the necessary packages that would allow you to use the necessary components within your application. So in order for us to print some text in the application, we need to import something from Flutter. And that thing is generally, so you go like package. So we need to import a specific package from the Flutter library, and then we call that material. Notice here you have Cappuccino. So there are two main two main libraries you can import. Like the very first that exposes different kind of widgets to you, which are the Cappuccino and the material. I'll explain the difference in a bit, but let me go for the material. So the main difference between these two is that, just give me a second, let me Google something up really fast. So this is, I just want to show you the difference between Cappuccino and material, just to get you an idea. So, you have like Android, so the prominent OS mobile operating systems out there is generally Android and iOS. And both kind of have some sort of different feel and different look. So with material, it's more like Android kind of feel, and if it's Cappuccino, it's more like iOS kind of feel. So if you go to Flutter, this is what I've Googled. So this is what Cappuccino iOS widgets kind of look like. You kind of have this, this kind of look and feel like, curved curved angles, and then you have these kind of buttons, and then this kind of they kind of look specific to iOS, right? And then you have the material components, which are more like sharp kind of look. They kind of have this sharp feel, something like Android kind of. This is the header. Notice the difference in the header bar. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? I'm not sure where is it. Where is it? Where is it? But I think you get the gist of how things actually look. This is kind of, so that's the main difference. Those are the two main components that you should know. This is the very first thing we should import. So you just tell Flutter that we will be using Android kind of feel, or more like Cappuccino kind of feel. Usually we go with Material, and because everything is, at the end of the day, is super customizable. And I don't know, just okay, all right. Let's not go into anything else. That's about it. So you need to import the package that you wanna use, and either a Material or Cappuccino both expose the necessary widgets that you need in your application. The difference is that if you use Material, it's more like this subtle Android kind of feel. If you go with Cappuccino, it's more like the iOS kind of feel. And I think personally, I do believe that using the Material kind of gives you this kind of balanced kind of look that you could adopt in both iOS and Android both at the same time. You can think of different applications, like I don't know, like the Amazon application. It's basically the same in both iOS, the same look and feel in both iOS and Android. And you could adopt the same methodology. You don't have to like go specifically to iOS or Android. Anyways, it's your preference at the end of the day. Now, moving on. Now, as with any application, let me start up Paint. As with any application, there is a starting point. So when the system starts to run your application, it has to begin somewhere. You have all these different files, different components in your system, but which file is the starting point? Like if you're familiar with web application or web development, if it's Python, you have the app.py, or maybe let's go with, I don't know, PHP, if you're familiar with PHP. Usually, if you want to default the server to like a starting point, you just name that file to index.php or the index.html, whatever it is. That's usually the norm, and that's what the server would usually default to. If there is a file called index, that's what usually gets exposed or delivered to the user. That's the starting point, basically. With Flutter, it's basically the same. You need a starting point. This is the main point. You have to have a main access point to your application. From this main point, you can go to different paths, different screens. Say, for example, the main screen is actually a login screen. So after you log in, you can either have you could have maybe a successful attempt, a successful login, and then you move on to different screens. Maybe halfway along the way, you'd kind of have a different path here and a different path here, and then you would have another path here, and then you would have another path here. This basically takes you to different kind of screens, and at the end of the day, you kind of form a tree. So this is what basically how the app would work. So you have a starting point, and then this starting point would direct you to another screens. So this starting point would be a screen that you display the user, and then from there you just move to different paths until you reach your destination or deliver what you want to deliver through the app. So that main point is defined using what you call main. So you define a function called main, and then it takes in some content. That's it. That's all that is needed. Something you should note though, because we're using dots, Flutter uses dots underneath, so every function has to have a return type. So if this function returns an integer, this has to be an integer. If this returns a string, it has to be a string. If this returns a double, this has to be a double. But main generally doesn't return anything, so we give it the void keyword, and it doesn't take in many parameters, and that's about it. Now we know, okay, so the system comes into main. Now Flutter goes like, what am I supposed to do? Okay, there's nothing inside of main. Now there is a keyword that you also should use, which is called run app. So basically run app takes in a class, and a class is generally a widget, more like a screen. You can think of classes as widgets or screens. So say for example I created a screen that has an input form, so, like a username, password, and a button, and those widgets exist inside of a, I want to compile all of those under single components. So I add them to something called a class. And in that class basically combines the widgets that I have. Of course, this does not mean that in Flutter, a class does not have the normal definition of a class, which is a method and properties, or that you could create objects from. No. So a class, you can think of it here in this case that you could compile or combine or merge different widgets to in a single kind of group them together in a class. Yeah, I think that's the right one to use. So now let's leave this empty for now, and then let me show you what I mean by the class. So let's go ahead and define a class. So the very first thing we want to do, remember that we want to create the onboarding screens, right? So we want to have an image, and then we want to have a text and an indicator here and a button. That's what we want to do. So let's create a class that holds these together, groups these widgets together. Now let's go ahead. It's very simple. So this is the way we do it: class, and then we give it a class name, and then this should extend something called state, a type of class that you want to see. You notice earlier that I said that the class, you can create a class that performs a certain operation. Like for example, the normal sense of a class, you would define a class name, and in that class you would have certain properties and certain methods that represent that entity. Yeah. But again, if I want to compile different widgets together, now that to form a screen, we've also named that as a class. Now, what you should know is that if these widgets change, can change on the screen, like say for example, the example we've seen in the last video, the default example that comes with Flutter, if you clicked on the button, the counter would increase. So the counter changes on the same screen. In that case, we call this a stateful widget, a stateful class. So when we name the class a stateful class, we're saying basically that the widgets within this class can change. So the system or the mobile of Flutter will re-render the components that we decide that will change. In this case, in the default example of Flutter, the change happened in the counter. As we click a button, the counter changes the number that we see on the screen. So that part that changes, that required us to name the class a stateful class. But because the onboarding screen does not require any changes on the screen, and it's the easiest way to start demonstrating different classes, we start with something called stateless. So there is no change on the screen except moving to another screen. There is no change on that specific screen. So in this case, our class would extend something called stateless widget, like that. Of course, there is another easier way to to do this in VS Code that really speeds up things for you. You could just click on the stateless widget and then just name it. In this case, let's name this class, which is the very main class, as Tetra. Yeah. So that's pretty straightforward. Again, just to quickly recap, because this is super important, and I know this video might be a little bit longer than expected because I'm kind of trying to give more details, trying to properly explain how things work in Flutter. But the later videos, I'm definitely sure that they will be like we'll just swift through them. Again, let me just do a quick recap. So if we decided to form a screen is a form of widgets. Widgets are basically buttons, text, whatever it is, images, whatever it is that you want to display. Those called widgets, and a combination of those can be merged together into something called a class. We can merge them in a class. And a class could be a stateful class or a stateless class. So what that mean is that if that set of widgets can change, they have something that changes within them, within the screen, then we name them stateful. If the widgets are not going to change, basically something fixed that just is static, that's displayed to the user, and then if the user clicks something, it moves on to another screen, then in that case it's a stateless widget. It's a static widget that doesn't really change anything in it. Yeah, awesome. So let's move on. Now, there's something else that you should also know. Every statement in Flutter, dot basically ends with a semicolon. This is just something you have to, this is something specific to the language. In Python, we don't have semicolons. We just have new lines, but yeah. So that's that. Now, something you should know, since we've imported material, now we just imported the library. Remember, this is just importing, but we have to specifically tell Flutter that you would have to, you know, kind of, I think the best way to explain this is, okay, let's run this. And you can see the error that shows up. Let's run without debugging. Oh yeah, we have a cancel. We just didn't specify. And now in this case, we just specify the class that we've created. Again, semicolon here. So this is the class we've created. We just told main to run the app, and then we gave it this screen, this class, etc. Now if we try to run this, run without debugging, all right. Okay. As you can see, of course, this basically tells you if you use the .dev tools, it opens the browser and just basically just give you some kind of control, like you could actually more like inspect like the developer tool in the browser. This one basically gives you performance assessment of the application. You can, like, you know, do some fancy stuff, but we'll just do this in another time in the future. We don't want to, like, you know, drop too much information on you for now. Anyways, so you notice there's this black screen that just shows up, like blank screen, and this is basically what has worked now. Okay, so now if I am, yeah, there's one other point that we need to explain before we proceed. As you can see, when I created this class, which is these are the boundaries of the class, there is this method within this class that's called build. So in Flutter, for every class, now remember when we said there is a class that has that in the normal sense of a class, that is basically where you have properties and you have methods like setters and goers, setters and getters within the class that you see in object-oriented programming, and then you'd have in this kind of class that's basically kind of a combination of different widgets. Now, when you create when you group different widgets together, you have to override the build method, and the build method basically states that how do you say? I mean, how do you explain this? So this basically tells Flutter to render what is in it, like in a tree kind of form. So you start off rendering this, and then in it you render what's inside of this, and then in it you render what's in it inside of that, you know, inside of that widget. So it's like, you know, you render the children one after the other. So that's what the build actually kind of does. It just informs Flutter to actually render the objects that are the children within the build method. So render whatever is inside of this method. So think of this as like it's so dumb, and then you need to tell it specifically what it should do. That's it. And it's not really dumb. It's really super smart. I mean, Flutter is pretty insane. The amount of job and effort they've done. They really tackled multiple drawbacks in React Native. That I can tell you. Anyways, moving on. So this is what you should always have whenever you create a group of widgets within Flutter. So this basically groups together different widgets. So I noticed that when we created return a container is a type of widget within Flutter, and container gives you this flexibility of adding a background color, you know, this kind of stuff. Like if we could add a color here, let's go colors, blue, for example. This is one, and every widget has something called a child or children. If it's children, is a set of widgets within that widget. So this is something really important to visualize. Let me open up this again. Flutter is basically like this. So you create, say, a container, and within that container you create say different kind of widgets. Say you create so the container takes only one child, so it has to have, if it's text, you can only have one widget called text. You can't have anything else. If you want to have more, well, let me show you that in a bit. For now, let's just have a single child called text, and let's name it blood donation. And then we save it. Let's see the change. Nicely. So basically what this error is saying is that let me show you just 1 second. Let me remove something real quickly. And I think I should change my mind of showing you what that means, because basically what this is saying is that, you know, a text no directionality. So when I typed in text, it doesn't really know if it's a left to right text or right to left text. There is no context of defining any kind of, you know, it doesn't have any kind of formatting to the text that you want to display. So what's really important, this is where this comes in really super handy. Now you could go and define like the text directionality, and then, you know, it just ends up a whole different set of, you know, other stuff you need to worry about. But because we're just learning and the very early stage of learning and how to actually work with Flutter, I don't think we should solve this problem just yet. But it's really important for us to really know the value, and I think this is a really good time to show you something related to Material App. Now, you know, we said that there's Material and there's Cappuccino. Cappuccino is more like iOS kind of look and feel. Material is more like the standard style Android kind of feel, more like something in between. Not necessarily Android kind of feel, but you get my point. So in this case, in order for us to actually tell Flutter to use, now remember, this line here just imports the library. It doesn't mean that the moment we imported the library, it automatically runs. And because this adopts Flutter, that's why these do not show any errors. You know, this actually you know, the default is in Flutter in the background. That's why these widgets related to Flutter do not show any errors. But we did not tell this code. There's nothing in this code that states that we need to use Material. And this is where we could, you know, let's remove this. Let's remove everything. Instead of us returning a container, we could return something else. We could return something called Material App. There we go. And then again, semicolon. Now, what about we add a container? Now, notice something. What's the difference between Material App? Material App basically gives you this set of features that you can adopt. It gives you, you know, a whole set of how do you say this? How do you explain this? A whole set of I think, okay, all right. I'll explain this in a bit. So inside of Material App, let's do what we wanted to do earlier. We have home, right? So in the Material App, basically you can do multiple stuff. You can define the theme of the application and how it would look like. the colors, the font, the directionality. Of course, there are defaults that ship with Material App. The moment you use Material App and then you define whatever is in it, like in this case, remember when we said here everything has to have a child in Flutter. Now, I mean, different widgets, different widgets. Each widget has to have a child. Okay, so in this case, it's children. You can think of it as home. And you could define like a common theme to the application, like you could unify the color of the application, you could set a theme for the text and everything else. And inside of home is basically the content that you want to display, like your main, it's like the main screen kind of, if that's the right term to use, the main boilerplate. It's more like so in this case, let me show you here. So in this case, you can see that the white background in the back is unified all over my screen. So it's all the same. There's always this. So that you can think of this as this is the Material App on the back. It's like the master template, and then in it I'll make the necessary changes. It's like the master theme. Okay, so in here let's print a container. And inside a container, we said we need a child, and let's have it text blood donation. Now let's run this. See what it shows? It's pretty, it's what we wanted to display. Now, inside of Material App, remember, let me show you something. Let me just Google Material App class. Just want to show you something, what's in the class. Right. Yeah, see, this is really important. The Material App configures the top-level navigator to search for routes in the following order: home, and all the other goodies in there. Widget app. I want to show you something. Yeah, see, it has Scaffold. Yeah, this is what I wanted to show you, these properties. So you can set a common, like you could set like a doc theme. You could have a unified theme, locale, the directionality of the text, RTL, left to right, right to left, and then you have widget, the home, theme mode, title, and all the other goodness, global state. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the Material App. So the moment we use Material, things default. Like in this case, it's left to right. The text is left to right, and all the other goodness. Now, look. If I decided to change something here in the container, let's go for colors.red. See what happens? The full screen changes. Not that just because this container is the parent. Otherwise, if this is contained in another container, this doesn't really impact all the full screen. But you get my point, yeah? Now, instead of us using all of this, it's pretty ugly, right? I mean, notice there's no formation, there's no, I mean, it looks like there's a really long way for us to go. I mean, we have to have like we need to set some boundaries. Like if we decided to do this, now imagine if let me reformat this. And then if we decided to go, like we could do padding here, right? And then we go padding. There's something, in order for us to do the padding, we need to use something called edge insets dot all, and then we could set a value here, say 20. Okay, let me reformat this. See what happens. See, kind of there's padding that happened to the text, like around the children. The padding happened around the children in the container. Now you could go like, and let's go here instead of, let's go green. Okay, so if I increase this to say 50, notice what happens. So the padding around the children gets added here, right? Yeah, but it's still, I mean, we could go now and do the implementation of, like we could add an image here and then a text right below it and then a button. This design, basically this design that we want to adopt. Where is it? Yeah, basically this kind of design, this kind of screen that we want to adopt and we want to implement. But in this case, we don't have to. There's a better way to do this and use the goodness that comes with Flutter. So let's remove all of this. Let's remove all of this. And the reason I'm removing all of this and I'm just typing things again is that because and typing things again is just to make things simpler for you. I mean, now there's something called that is also provided to us from Material. It's called Scaffold. Now, what's beautiful about Scaffold is that it gives us a set of stunning things by default. Like, for example, this would automatically configure the full screen to, first of all, it would allow us to create a drawer, more like, the menu to the side that you just flip here. It allows us to have an app bar. We don't have to configure where the app bar would go. Like, it doesn't have to. We don't have to specify the position that it would sit on the screen. We don't have to specify kind of padding. It automatically comes in Scaffold. A Scaffold comes in Material app. See the beauty here? Now, it kind of also gives us the floating point that we've seen earlier in the very first example. This floating point here, floating button. It gives us a set of interesting things that we could use within the Scaffold. And what's really nice is that it kind of gives us the framework that with a basic implementation of the Material app. Snack bars, drawers, bottoms, bottom sheets, background color, and all the other goodness. But what we really need from Scaffold for now is the body. Notice the Material app uses home, and the Scaffold uses body. And in the body, let's have a container. Let's have a container like that. And again, we need a child. And the child, let's have a text. Let's call it blood donation, like that. Let me just we need to reformat this. So where's the Material app? We're missing two. Yep, we're missing another one. What is wrong with this part? So we have 3. The Material app is here, and then let's go. Material app. We have 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Then we got 3 closing. We need one more here for the Material app. Or is this Material app and then a semicolon? And then let's reformat this. So now let's see what happens. Look at the beauty. See where the blood donation is? Everything just changed. It's like more, it has a better feel and better look, right? Now, notice something that we could do here. Let me just add in the Scaffold, we could also add an app bar. And app bar takes an app bar widget, just like that. And then it should have, this app bar takes in you can see a set of parameters it takes. There's one called title. And in the title, we could say it home, for example, right? Yeah, it takes the title like this in a form of a widget. Now this takes a widget, text, home, like that. See where the title is? So everything is managed for us by this Scaffold widget here. It's so amazing. I mean, notice how these are predefined for each widget. So I'm not saying that you have to memorize this, but you could always go back to the library and actually see what each widget provides to you, exposes for you. Now in this case, notice here that let's move on. I know this video has really became longer than expected, but I hope that it's worth it though. Anyway, so let me just keep on going. Like let's create this sketch and then I'll probably set the okay. So let's implement this now, yeah, really fast. So one thing I like to do is that before I start even implementing, adding the necessary widgets, I just place them together. Now in this case, let's call this widget here. Let's call this widget an image. So we need to have an image, and we also need to have. Now notice something, that these are stacked on top of each other. How do we achieve that? We achieve that through something called a column. So we could achieve through the column. If we specify a column, that means that anything we line up inside of the column, I mean the children are lined up one after the other, just like that. So this is what a column means. And it takes a set of widgets inside of, like, this could be a button, this could be a text, this could be a text field, an image, whatever it is. And if we want to line them next to each other, we use what we call a row. So a row basically means like this. Whatever components, whatever children it has are lined up next to each other. And a column is whatever children it has are lined up on top of each other. Now, we could, let me show you this. There's an easy way to achieve this whenever you get kind of stuck. You click in this like a bulb here, and then you go like wrap with a column. Notice the children, a column takes in children. Notice children is not a single child. It's children, and it's a list of widgets. This is the format. This is the list format of dots. So you just have to get flattened dots, and you just have to remember the syntax. So it's a list of widgets, and it takes a set of widgets. Now, the way we add more widgets to this, now let's add another text here. A text would be the caption, and then we also need another text, which is the indicators, and then we also need a button. All right, a button. And then we could also do we could add a little bit of padding here to the padding. See what this padding takes in. So it takes, if you notice here, edge insets geometry padding. So the moment you see like edge insets, you could directly go edge inset geometry, or you could do this like that. And then let's save it and see what goodness we get to see. And there we are. So we have the image, caption, indicators, spelling mistake, whatever, and then we have the buttons. You could narrow this a little bit. We don't need the extra space, just for us to keep this pretty. So indicators and button. Now, the next step we should be doing is that we should be converting what is. So in this case, this is a text. We wanted to make this as a button. So in material, we have something called flat button. So we could go flat button, and then it's again, this takes a set of widgets, that's children. So as you can see, and it takes a bit of padding and on pressed. So it takes in on pressed. Let's have this null, and it also takes children. Child. Child, it doesn't take children. It takes a child, and in the child, let's give it a text. And in the text, let's give it a next. That's what we wanted, I believe, right? Okay. This is a button, next. Remember, we could add a, oops. What is going on? Yeah. So, there we are. And, yep, that's it. That's the one we're looking for. So, now, assuming we wanted to have, like, not a single child, but more than a single child. Remember, we have the column and the rows that supports multiple children. Like, instead of us having next and this arrow here, we want to have another text widget that says that has that symbol, the arrow symbol. Well, let's wrap this. Now, see, we want to line them next to each other. So the text and the arrow. So let's wrap this with a row. Like that, and now we have this list of widgets. Now we could add this arrow here, this indicator, and notice how this kind of changes also the formatting, because now the row kind of takes the whole space and is waiting for the elements to line up right next to each other. We will see how we can format this later in the next videos, but for now, this is what we really want, right? So we have these set of elements right here. Now there's also something that you kind of need to know, and then um, in the column you can line the elements. Now this is the full column, but let's give it a, let's see if it takes in a color. There we are. It does. I don't think it takes in colors. It doesn't take in colors. I think it takes in background color if I'm not mistaken. No, it doesn't take in background color. What is that? No. Let me just take a look at what properties it takes. I know the container takes in color. Oh yeah, yeah. Okay. Let me just take a look. Let me take a quick look on. Take a look. Or you know what? Let's just ignore that for now because well, I know there is a decoration here that you can use. I think we could expand this. We could. Anyways, forget about it. Forget about it. I'll just explore the next video. But I kind of know in order for us to achieve, we could have the expanded widget here, and then we can color the different widgets within the main one. But anyways, so this is a general. So and then for the images, we just also need we just change the text to an image widget, and the same, and the text caption would remain the same. And for the indicators, we could also use we could use another widget for to display kind of the circular. Um, you could have like a with like a super huge edge, a circle with an edge. Sorry, a rectangle with an edge to it. Yeah, something like. I mean, we will get to see more about it in the next video, but yeah, I mean the indicate for the indication. Sorry, the indicators. We could just use a box decoration. Sorry, more like a container with a box decoration. And set a border radius of say some 5 or whatever, that kind of. I'll show you this in the next set of videos because I think this has been a really long video. So I hope that the main concepts that I've explained here make sense, and hopefully the next set of videos will go like super fast, because I think I've explained the main important parts that are I mean the complicated parts at least. For now, every widget. So a quick recap, like a super quick recap. Um, so if we decided to use the subtle kind of look, the feel, we can use Material or we can use Cappuccino. There's a set of widgets exposed to Material only, and there's a set of widgets that you can only use in Cappuccino. But I've stuck to Material because I think it gives us a balanced kind of feel and look. And then we have the main, where the starting point, and in the starting point it takes the class that we want to render on the screen. And again, a class is a set of widgets. A set of widgets. If the widgets change their form on the screen, that we name those. We name the widgets as we name that widget or that was set of widgets to stateful widgets, extended stateful class. And then if we are to implement stateless widgets, like widgets that are static and not necessarily change on the screen, that we can use stateless widgets. And every widget, every stateful or stateless widget has to implement the build. So the build kind of instructs Flutter to build whatever it's to build all of its children together. So in this case, again, given we've used Material, we need to tell Flutter that we want to use, because this is just an importation and it kind of exposes different components for us, and Material app is one of those components that we have to specifically specify. So Material app exposes Scaffold, and Scaffold exposes all this pretty stuff for us, like the bar, the drawer bar, if we want to have like a slide to left and then the menu to the left shows up, buttons and so on and so forth. It takes care of all the formatting and all the aesthetics of the application. And the Material app, we can specify like a global. It's more like a global app. So whatever we define in Material Lab, like the theme and everything, is global to the application. And Scaffold is specific to the screen that we're displaying right now. So we've defined a body. Inside of the body, the Scaffold takes in a body and a bar and others, and button something, button drawers, and so on and so forth. But it takes on several good stuff like we can define multiple stuff for the like we could have an app bar, we could have a drawer, you could have a body, you could have all the good stuff that's exposed by Scaffold. You could look at the documentation for the full set of features that you could come with Scaffold, but we don't need the drawer for now and all the good stuff, so we are just going to ditch those. We're just going to use the app bar and body most of the time. And the body takes in all the goodness that comes in after the app bar if it's defined. So a container is always a good idea to wrap, to have the container being the parent, because it gives you the flexibility to define coloring, padding, and so on and so forth. And if you have a set of widgets you want to group them together, you could like stack them together. You could use a column. If you wanted them to line side by side, you could use the row. And yeah, so in the next video we will convert this. We would have an actual image here, and we would have a caption here. And then we will also work on the indicators. So in the indicators, we have multiple ways to achieve this, but we will for now just demonstrate the first onboarding screen. So for now, we'll just do the first onboarding screen, and then we will move on to the rest of the screens later on. Yeah, so the next video we will also tap into the theme of the application. The blue doesn't really suit the application that we're working with, given a blood donation app, so we would have it more like a brownish red kind of color. So for now, yeah, that's about it. And till the next video, I hope this wasn't really too long. I know it was. So apologies for that, and see you in the next video. Have a good one.